Okay. Welcome, everyone. We will call the meeting to order at 7:01 for the Committee of the Whole, Tuesday, July 4th, 2023. The first item on the agenda is adoption of the agenda. Moved by Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Yes. There's no amendments to it. So it's as presented. I'll call the question. In favor, please raise a hand. Motion is passed. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest for the general nature thereof for this evening's meeting? Seeing none. Move to staff reports, community outdoor rink program. We have manager here. Did you have something to share with us this evening?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a PowerPoint to share with you this evening. The ladies are going to help me here. So the report before you this evening is in relation to an outdoor rink program. We have never had a formalized rink program, and we have actually during the pandemic and post-pandemic had quite a few requests for outdoor rinks. So I'm going to give you a bit of background this evening about what happened pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and the last year, and then make some recommendations moving forward. So the goal is to implement an outdoor rink program that, in partnership with community volunteers, will provide quality outdoor rinks throughout the township. So this evening, I said I was going to share some history or background with you. Pre-pandemic, we had various locations that had outdoor rinks. None of this was through a formal program, and therefore none of the volunteers were covered through our insurance, were not trained. Logs on rink maintenance, those types of things were very, I'll say, vague, if they even existed. So previous to the pandemic, we had Skater Park. Years and years ago, this was actually done at William Street Park, and then it was transitioned to Skater Park through its creation. It was led by a volunteer, and then when that volunteer became a bit older and unable to maintain it, it was transitioned to township staff. However, township staff would build and maintain that rink as time and resources allowed. Their first priority was always winter control operations as it related to roads, sidewalks, parking lots, things of that sort. So it was a very inconsistent service and wasn't always available when the community wanted it and or when Mother Nature would allow for it. We also had several locations throughout the township that had volunteer-led rinks. Lakeview Park is one of them, Sunnyside Park. One year there was one at the lawn of the Discovery Center. Out in Wilton at J. Earl Burt, there was a rink. So there's several throughout the community that were led by volunteers that did not have a lot of inclusion of the township. A lot of those locations were either fed off of natural water, the one in Wilton, or through a township tap for water. The inspections were not completed, as I said, and that led to a high risk for the township. We then lead into the pandemic, and obviously for a variety of reasons throughout the pandemic, there was a lot of services affected indoors and outdoors. The outdoor rinks, although one would have thought it would have been a great opportunity during COVID, the restrictions that were put upon us was we still had to maintain capacities at those venues as well as check vaccination status. So if you recall, a couple of years ago during the pandemic, staff brought forward a report for those who were on council, and it was decided not to do the outdoor rinks because of resources at that point. Post-pandemic, last year was the first season that we operated, I'll say, to a normal degree. We did not offer a rink last year, and that was strictly related to weather. Mother Nature did not cooperate. One day it was -10 and the next day it was +10, and it went that way pretty much all winter. So we do need consistent weather in order to build a rink that has no refrigeration to it. So that gives you a bit of a history of where we're coming from. The last winter, although the weather was not ideal for building rink, we did receive a number of calls saying we would like to build a rink at Sunnyside Park again or Lakeview Park again. We want our outdoor rinks, what can we do? So staff started working on a community outdoor rink program and trying to formalize a program that would allow us to engage volunteers, protect ourselves, allow protection for the volunteers to have them insured, provide them with training, provide them with resources, and be able to provide some of these services to the community. So overall, when you look at an outdoor rink, it certainly does bring people together. It's free, it's outside, it's healthy. It engages more volunteers in our community. And as you can see here, it brings people together and it's unscheduled. It's not people saying, I can only go public skating on Sunday at 11 a.m. It is as weather permits, as the rink is open, they can freely go use these facilities. So within the program tonight that's in your agenda, I'm going to summarize the 33 pages very quickly for you, and I'm happy to answer any questions. What township staff are recommending is that we select 4 parks in 2023-2024 outdoor season and run a pilot program. It would be Skater Park, Lakeview Park, Sunnyside Park, and 3 this year, and then an additional location in the future would be at the front lawn of Discovery Center at Fairfield Kutzeit House. That is going to be under construction this coming season, so we would not be able to do that this year. We've also made provisions within the program to consider Amherst Island if a group of volunteers came forward to do a location there that we think was feasible. So these locations are chosen based on exactly what I said before. There's a water spigot that with our utilities department, they're comfortable with us accessing that water. They're flat, there's drainage, it's accessible. When I say accessible, you can either walk to it and or drive to it, and driving to those locations does not pull any additional vehicular traffic into a highly residential area. Sunnyside has a bit of residential around it, but it's very minor. It's a right turn and a left turn getting into that area. We want to make sure that the impact on those subdivisions and those residential homes is as minimal as possible. The only location that does have lights is Skater Park. It doesn't mean we wouldn't consider lights if somebody came forward with the equipment and the ability to do it. Resources is another consideration. We certainly are in a situation right now with our staffing that within parks and facilities, our team is responsible for all parking lots, sidewalk plows, shoveling around facilities, those types of things, and we work with the public works team. So we would work with them to determine the availability of staff to be able to maintain them ourselves. Where through a volunteer program where we could bring them in through our volunteer program that already exists, ensure them, train them, and be able to teach them a bit about ice maintenance and being able to do daily logs and those things. We would be able to work with volunteers to deliver a safe program. Staff would still be involved in terms of inspections, making sure proper signage is up with the volunteer group, things of that sort. So we would be passing on equipment to them, we would be passing on the knowledge and skills, and we would have constant communication with those volunteers. Within the program, we are making a recommendation for a small fund that would allow the volunteers to be able to use that money either for if they want to supplement with additional equipment and or just to offset their costs and time. So what we're recommending is a $500 grant per volunteer group that does a rink. So it has an impact of $2,000 in the budget. Through this program, we're also, and through the recommendation, you'll see it's $4,000 being recommended. The additional $2,000 is to purchase all of the equipment required in order to give it to the volunteer group to run the rink, and then it would be returned to the township at the end of the season. The last portion is the risk that I wanted to talk a bit about. We have been in contact with our insurer. Intact Public Entities does have provisions for outdoor rinks and makes recommendations on how to set up successful programs, and we have consulted with that program and followed it. We have sent our draft program off to our insurer just to have a look to make sure that they're comfortable with it. They did confirm that our current liability insurance through the township would cover this level of service, so there's not a concern there. With training being involved for us staff to give the training to the volunteers, to be able to provide the maintenance background within the program, there's inspection reports already done for them that is easy for them to follow and fill out. They'll have after-hour phone numbers, things of that sort. And then the weather. The weather is always the last thing to think about, but it's actually the biggest impact on the program. So all of this is truly dependent on a successful winter with Mother Nature being nice to us in Ontario, where people like to play outside in the winter on the ice, whether it be through hockey or skating or taking your little ones out for the first time on their bobsled skates and being able to, have those experiences as a family. So as much as we can improve the program and make recommendation, it is still very much weather dependent as we move forward. So for tonight, I do have some recommendations for committee. The recommendation would be that committee recommend to council the attached community outdoor rink policy to be adopted. and that $4,000 be approved to be added in annual parks operating budget for all the necessary equipment and the community grant portion of the program. And then a postseason report would be presented to council with recommendations for future seasons. And that's the presentation for this evening, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Council, any questions for Councilor Pratt?
Through you, your work, just one question. Volunteer group, does that have to be identified like Loyalist Minor Hockey or Cubs, or can it be a neighborhood group of that get together?
Through you, Mr. Chair. It could be either. In the past, we have had a group of neighbors who got together and they wanted to offer this rink for their community. We would accept that, and the program is set up that we would just register each individual as an individual volunteer for that specific rink.
Thank you.
Okay. Councilor Willis.
No power. Through the chair. I am assuming, but I just want to know for certain that this would only be in township parks or on township land. So if someone came through and said, I have private land that you could host one of these rinks on, that would not qualify for the program.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the township has supported rinks in the past on non-township land. There was an agreement, I think it was about 3 years ago, with the Millhaven Legion to host an outdoor rink at that location, and there was an agreement put together. I don't want to say we wouldn't entertain it. I think we would need to look at what is the land and what are the provisions in the agreement in place to show who is responsible for what. Anything can be done as long as we have those provisions put in place and it's identifiable that there's certain roles and responsibilities.
Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? I have one. In the report, it's mentioned that historically the little pond that Buffalo Weldon used to be used to just not really maintain, shows off and used. It's not in this original list here. Is that because there's no water for flooding and maintaining, or I'm just curious what that line was not?
Thank you for the question. We actually had some great discussion about that location. There's a few challenges with the location since the rink was it was naturally flooded. It was a pond that would just continually flood itself through Mother Nature, and you would take your shovels out like you would on any lake and clear it off. The challenge has been is that over time, that area now has a lot of green and bush and ragweed and all that fun stuff growing up through it. So in order to do an outside proper rink there, we would have to clear cut that. And it would require then CRCA consultation and some further discussion. The other part of that location is that there's a lovely toboggan hill that the community loves to use, and it comes down right onto the rink. So we're looking at a bit of a risk situation with two activities colliding. I think if we wanted to look at a rink, we could look at what are the possibilities in that community for an outdoor rink, and is that the right location, or possibly is Wilton Park if we can access water, those types of things. So just being that the area has some environmental growth coming through it, we thought we would avoid that situation at this point.
And there would be quite a collision zone. That is a heavily used hill.
You would want to wear a helmet.
Yeah, you can really get over it. It's a good hill. Okay. Any other questions for staff? Seeing none. We have a report before us with the recommendation that the report from the Community and Customer Services Department, Recreation and Facilities Division, July 4th, 2023, Great Community Outdoor Rink Program be received, and that the committee recommend to council that A, the attached community outdoor rink program be adopted, and that $4,000 be pre-approved to be added to the annual park operating budget for all necessary equipment and the community grant portion of the program, and that the post-season report be presented to council with recommendations for future seasons. Do I have a mover? Councillor Boucher, seconded by Councillor Broderick. Mover, any comments? Seconder?
Just one comment. I hope it works because I did have also people approach me over the past little while, and now it's time sort of to step up and get it done, but a valuable project, and hopefully we'll have some success with person nature.
Any other comments? None. I just want to thank staff for bringing this forward. I have received a lot of comments from it. Of course, it's busy in social media when it's cold. And when it would be, you get the 3 days where it'd be cold enough for a rink to be there. So that's good that we're trying to make it possible. And there is the nature that may always be a bit of an issue, but we're doing everything we can. With that, there's no further comments. I'll call a question. All in favor? Motion is passed. Next one is the crossing guards, and they appear.
No, I just checking.
I was just gonna say, we'll send somebody to get you.
We were listening.
So. So once you're settled, you have a presentation to bring forward. There it is. Please proceed whenever you're ready.
You let Tom Burton into the yeah, why? He is not. Tom was just getting back from vacation, so he was going to join us if he was available. So tonight's presentation will provide an overview of the school crossing guard program, including the methodology we use to review our existing school crossing guard locations, site-specific findings, followed by next steps and recommendations. The presentation itself doesn't get into the financial components that are in the report, but I'd be more than happy to discuss those at the end of the meeting. I have with me tonight Jesse Dolly, technical supervisor. Jesse has the crossing guard program under his responsibility, and Tom Burton was also going to join us. And Tom is one of our technician operators and was helped collect a lot of the data and develop the warrant program that I'm going to discuss tonight.
Or Alex, he may have joined the committee of adjustment meeting. I saw T. Burton.
Can you text and join him?
If you throw me his email, I can throw him the link.
So. So the public works committee assumed responsibility for the school crossing guard program at the beginning of the current 2022-23 school year, which I guess is now the one that recently just completed. During our research for this presentation, it was noted that the former Ernestown Township may have employed crossing guards as far back as the 1970s. Over that time, there's been substantial changes to the way students commute to school over that school. Whereas most kids would have walked to school when I was a student, a large percentage are now bused in from other areas, including as far away as Sydenham and Adolphustown. Crossing guard locations should continue to be monitored on an ongoing basis, with locations added or removed as needed. There are currently 8 existing crossing guard locations in Loyalist Township. Current crossing guard locations in Amherst View are Kildare and Manitou, Briscoe and Sherwood, Briscoe and Park, Amherst Drive and Upper Park, Amherst Drive and Fairfield at Centennial Park. There's also a single location in Odessa at Main Street and Durham. To the best of staff's knowledge, no warrant studies have previously been completed by the township. Previous decisions to implement a school crossing guard would probably have been based on requests from schools or parents, near misses or other incidents that may have occurred. Some of the crossing guard locations included 2 crossings at intersecting streets, and between the months of April and May of 2023, staff conducted 14 warrant studies to determine our current needs. While municipalities are not obligated to provide crossing guards. Should they choose to do so, there's legislation guidance on how to do so. The Highway Traffic Act sets out the rules of the road in Ontario, including the operation of school crossings and the role of school crossing guards. There are several sections that refer to pedestrians and road crossing regulations, such as school crossing guards cannot be assigned if the speed limit is less than 60 kilometers an hour, or obeying or need to obey crossing guard crossing directions. The Occupational Health and Safety Act sets out the duties for all workplace parties and rights for workers, establishes procedures for dealing with workplace hazards, and provides for enforcement of the law where compliance has not been achieved voluntarily. The Ontario Traffic Manual provides information and guidance on uniformity of traffic control devices, signage, line markings, etc., across the province, along with some best management practices. Over the years, different programs have been developed across the province with respect to the implementation and uniformity of school crossings. In 2006, the Ontario Traffic Council developed a guide for the use of municipalities in the evaluation of crossings and the use of school crossing guards. This guide was updated in 2017 and was used by staff for the warrant studies. The crossing guard guide notes that the Highway Traffic Act defines the role of a school crossing guard is to direct and supervise the movement of persons across a highway. So a highway is the Highway Traffic Act defines a highway as any public road. So it's sometimes confusing when you see references to highway because it's more than just what we would consider a highway. The crossing guard creates the necessary gaps in vehicular traffic to provide safe passage at designated school crossings. A crossing is a location supervised by a school crossing guard that's been recommended through a combination of site inspection and warrant evaluation process. And it may be at either controlled or uncontrolled locations. Although there are many factors that determine when a crossing guard is warranted, school crossing guard states that the crossing guard is not required until a minimum of 40 students who are in grades junior kindergarten through grade 5 are observed crossing off roadway. Municipalities are not obligated to follow the guide. They may choose to establish, for instance, their own definition of what a student is or what warrants we choose to use. The study followed this format. Basically, we reviewed the standards and guides that were available to staff. This was followed by individual site inspections of each site. Pedestrian traffic counts were collected. The data was analysis of the data was collected, and finally reporting of the findings. As this was the first time the warrant study had to be completed by the township, staff had to first dive into the various pieces of legislation that I previously discussed in order to understand and develop the process to be followed. Staff developed a set of inspection and data collection forms to be used by staff conducting the data collection to ensure it was done consistently and necessary information was available to complete the study. The first step was the initial site inspection, which typically looks at things like the weather, the time of day, the type of crossing. You might look at what sort of traffic controls are in place. Is it stop signs, signals? Would look at parking patterns, signage, posted speeds, things like that, and that's all recorded in the inspection form so that it's taken into account when we get back to the analysis stage. Some of the other things in that would be the collision history around that intersection. If we're noting that students are utilizing a shortcut to get to school, and rather than going through the crossing guards, and those type of notes are made as well. Because sometimes it may be simple as the crossing guard at point A should really be just one block down the road. So it's important to observe what's happening around those locations. There are two methods for reviewing the crossing locations to determine whether they're warranted or not. One is the gap study, and the other is the exposure method. The gap study is used at an uncontrolled location. These typically would be pedestrians or locations where pedestrians do not have the right of way. These would be things or places like mid-block crossings without pedestrian crossovers or designated school crossings in the absence of the school crossing guard, and without other forms of control such as signals, stop, yield signage, etc. The study basically looks at the time between vehicles or the gap time. And the time it takes for pedestrians to cross the road, or this is what they call safe gap time. This method is deemed the most effective evaluation method for minor street stop control or mid-block uncontrolled locations. It's not very effective for fully controlled intersections because the gaps are a natural byproduct of the control. And pavement markings and signage at these locations can provide a false sense of safety as motorists have the right of way without a school crossing guard present. It is recognized that younger students also have a more difficult time judging vehicle speeds when approaching roads. The exposure method is used at controlled locations such as traffic signals, stop signs, mid-block pedestrian signals, or pedestrian crossovers. An exposure index is developed by evaluating crossing guard locations within the same characteristics. So this data could be collected from other municipalities with the same sort of population density as our municipality, or because Loyalist already had crossing guards, we utilized existing data from our own crossings. Basically, what the exposure method does, it compares the number of students crossing the road to the number of vehicles traveling through the crossing during the crossing time. A graph is then plotted from the information collected and represents the standard for implementing crossing guards at new or existing locations. There is a bit of a graphic you can see at the bottom, and basically what happens is you evaluate the intersection based on the criteria, a score is developed, and then does the score fall below the line or above the line? If it's above the line, the warrant's met. If it's below the line, it's not. The school crossing guard provides the following additional information or additional considerations. The minimum student crossing volume. It's necessary to establish a consistent method of evaluation. The minimum number of students crossing during the school peak period should be set at a threshold of 40 students. A lower value may be used at the discretion of each municipality. Regardless of the value, the use of the uniform value throughout the municipality provides a quantitative tool for prioritizing the implementation of school crossing guards. The benefits are to ensure consistency of application, and if the minimum threshold is not met, alternative solutions should be considered, such as educating students and parents, directing pedestrians to safer routes, using crossing locations with less volume, use of signage, traffic control devices or markings, installation of traffic calming devices, conducting intersection control warrants, such as looking at whether additional stop signs are needed, traffic enforcement, or potentially even modification of parking regulations. The proximity to the school in general, school crossing guards should be deployed at intersections location where the school to be served is visible or in proximity. In addition, the site inspection process would verify which routes students prefer to take. And those, again, also help determine the appropriate location for the school crossing guard. The studies also look at the collision hazard reporting frequency, so how many collisions have occurred within the previous 3 years. Has it been an average of more than 2 reported collisions per year during school operations that are susceptible to correction by a school crossing guard? So just because it's been an accident at the intersection does not, if it doesn't occur during school time or it wasn't preventable by a crossing guard, it would not be counted. We also look at things like inadequate visibility during the site visit. Pedestrian and motorist visibility would be evaluated based on the presence of barriers such as hedges or signs or other buildings. Use a high frequency of large vehicles, for instance, that might block drivers' sight lines. So prior to getting into the site-specific findings, or which I will go through each site one by one for any questions that might council may wish to have. There are some general findings that I wish to point out. So there was no observed lunchtime use of school crossing guards by junior kindergarten to grade 5 students during our study period. It's not to say that they never happen, but generally they're nowhere even close to meeting the 40 threshold that is recommended by the guide. None of the crossings met the minimum threshold of 40 students during either the morning or afternoon shifts either. The 85th percentile for Loyalist's existing crossings was deemed to be 1,997 based on our existing crossings. This is equivalent to about 100 cars interacting with 20 students during a 30-minute period. There was no, some signage and maintenance improvements were noted during the site inspections, and where service requests have already been issued for staff to deal with any deficiencies that were found at the various locations. This table, which is also in the report, includes counts of both the junior kindergarten and grade 5 students, along with the total number of students regardless of their age. So that could be everything from junior kindergarten right to grade 12. What we're trying to identify is just who's crossing when they're crossing. Staff noticed substantially fewer kids in the junior kindergarten grade 5 group, which, considering that it's a larger number attending the public schools than the grade 7 and 8s, the numbers didn't seem to correspond, and we were trying to figure out why their numbers were substantially lower than the grade 7 and 8s kids, or 6, 7, and 8s. Suspected this is likely to do with Tri-Board's transportation policy, which junior kindergarten and grade 6 can walk a maximum of 1.6 kilometers to school with busing. Once they reach grade 7, that increases to 3.2 kilometers. So the number of kids walking would substantially increase for the older kids. As noted previously, a minimum of 40 students would be required for the use of the school crossing guard. The maximum count in Loyalist was 15, and this was observed at the intersection of Kidd and Kildare. While none of our crossings met the minimum threshold, there are other considerations which would still potentially warrant the use of school crossing guards at a specific location. I do know that 4 sites did get lunchtime use by students older than grade 5. So at Main Street in Odessa, there is a very high volume of high school students that utilize that crossing guard during the lunch hour. At Fairfield and Centennial, as well as Briscoe and Park, there were 2 class trips, which the students were accompanied by teachers. That would not qualify as a school crossing guard need because they are accompanied by an adult. And then in addition, there were 9 students older than grade 5 that were observed at the Kidd and Kildare intersection just next to Fairfield Public School. And it should be noted that some schools permit older students to leave school property at lunch hours. I know my daughter, stepdaughter at Wellborn in Kingston, there's 2 days a week that they're allowed to leave school when they're in grade 8. So again, depending on which days, each class is like the different classes are different days. So it's just a matter of which days you're there and collect the data. So going to get into the site specific recommendations. The Amherst Drive and Fairfield Boulevard intersection. Some of the considerations with this one was the fact that it's the proximity to Amherst Public School. We did use the index method for our evaluation, which is the all stop condition. The maximum count of junior kindergarten grade 5 was 4. Observed during that period of time. There were about 24 older students that also utilized that crossing. So the findings and recommendation is that it would be less than the 85th percentile. Sorry, this location is greater than the 85th percentile of existing crossings, therefore we meet the warrants based on our existing use. However, it's less than 40 students. And because of the proximity to the school, we are recommending that we keep the crossing guard to continue to monitor for potential additional changes. And we are recommending the elimination of lunchtime service at this crossing. The next crossing is Fairfield Boulevard at Centennial Park. This is a mid-block crossing, so there's a crosswalk that comes out of the walkway at the park and crosses directly over to Amherst Public School. Because this is a mid-block, we use the gap study evaluation to determine whether it met the warrants or not. During the counts, it was noted that a maximum of 6 junior kindergarten to grade 5 students crossed at this location. However, there were 79 in the afternoon that crossed, the 79 older kids that crossed during the same period. Again, because of the high number of students, senior students, at this time, we're recommending that we keep the crossing guard location, but we eliminate the lunchtime service. The next location is Amherst Drive and Albert Park. This is directly or just north of Our Lady Mount Carmel. It was an all-stop condition on Amherst Drive, and as such, the index method was used in the evaluation. Again, there was a maximum of 2 students crossing at that location who were less than grade 5 or less. Slightly higher number of more senior students, up to around 14 students are crossing with the crossing guard. This is another one we're recommending we keep the crossing guard, but we want to continue to monitor this to see if that trend is continuing to decline or is it staying the same or increasing. However, the recommendation is to eliminate the lunchtime service at this crossing. Sherwood and Briscoe is visually within proximity to Our Lady. It was an all-stop condition at that intersection, so the index method was used once again, and a maximum of 9 students, junior kindergarten, grade 5, were observed at this crossing. There were 22 older kids that utilized it during the account. This site was this one was still greater than the, this one was still greater than the 85th percentile, and we are recommending the keep the crossing guard, but continue to monitor the location. And again, we're recommending we eliminate the lunchtime service. Park Crescent and Briscoe intersection. So this one is directly across from Our Lady Mount Carmel. And because it was a partial stop condition, the gap study evaluation was utilized. And one of the other considerations for this site is the fact that Our Lady Mount Carmel is currently looking at the redevelopment of their site. And so we've made some recommendations around ensuring that some of our existing traffic issues are dealt with during that site plan review. You know, as far as pickup zones and where parents are dropping off and picking up within the street, we've asked that be relocated to onto school property, and that's something school boards have across this whole area have kind of moved away from. They push the traffic out onto our roads. We're the ones dealing with issues. And we're seeing it at all of our schools, whether it's, you know, that's public or Bath or any of those schools, that become a real issue. And we're being asked to get that issue once the school board, in many cases, has created the issue. So we definitely have included some in our initial comments, so that we have addressed a number of the concerns around that specific site already to our planning group. This site specifically had 7 junior kindergarten to grade 5 crossings were observed, and approximately 156 were observed of the older kids. Again, we're recommending that we keep the crossing guard because of the amount of traffic that's in that area, the larger number of older students. And but however, we are recommending to eliminate the lunchtime service at that location. Kildare and Kidd, kind of similar findings to the rest. Generally, we're seeing with 15 was our max. This was actually our busiest crossing as far as the junior kindergarten to grade 5, and with the older kids, it was around, it looks like 950 was the maximum in the afternoon crossing this location. This one, as I noted earlier, did include 9 students at lunchtime. They were not in the junior kindergarten to grade 5. They were the older grade 6, 7, or 8. So again, we are recommending that we keep the crossing guard at this location. However, we eliminate the lunchtime service. Kildare and Manitou Crescent West. This is a minor stop condition. Manitou straight through. Kildare has a stop condition. So the index method evaluation was used. Yes, it was used at this location. Very low counts were observed at this location. One student crossed in the afternoon. And one student that was less than grade 5, and 6 in total were observed to be crossing. This is one that we're really looking at whether it should continue as a current crossing location. And one of the Manitou Crescent West is basically the dividing line between Fairfield Public School and Amherst Public School. So there's not a lot of the public school kids crossing. Lady Mount Carmel kids would be crossing because they have a wider catchment area. We're not recommending them be eliminated this time. We want to do a second study to confirm the findings of the initial, and that will be done in September of the new school year. And then finally, we have Main Street, Odessa, at Durham and West Street intersection. It's in visual proximity to both Odessa Public School and Erneststown Secondary Schools. It was evaluated using the GAP study method. As noted earlier, there's, the junior kindergarten grade 5 crossing is still pretty low. We had 8 during the study period. And however, at lunchtime, for instance, we had 115 older kids, and that could be right up to grade 12 cross at that time. For the time being, we're recommending we keep the crossing guard location, and we're recommending we keep the lunchtime service for the coming school year. Currently, we're in the process of discussing the redevelopment of Main Street, Odessa. And one of the considerations is whether to install a pedestrian crossover at that location, which would, with flashing lights, which would probably eliminate the need for crossing guards while allowing the high school students to cross safely, should they choose to use that location. So some of the next steps and recommendations. So the next steps are laid out in the school crossing guard guide. They have some recommendations on what to do if we were to choose to eliminate crossing guard locations. One of them is we would work with our communications team to develop a communication plan for both the school and the parents. We want to ensure that we get is that on yours? I got ConnectWise here on the screen here. Is that? I don't know if that's number. Must be ours. Sorry. So we want to develop the brochure literature for parents to review with the children should the school crossing guard be eliminated, or if their students utilize a lunchtime service that's no longer there. The guide discourages the abrupt stoppage during the middle of the school year. So ideally, you would want to start, if we're going to eliminate a service, you eliminate it right at the beginning or at the end of the subsequent year. A reminder notice would be sent out to the parents and students before the outlining the changes to crossing guard locations before the school year starts. And Public Works would undertake a second study at Kildare and Manitou to confirm the initial results prior to making the recommendation to eliminate that location. Should council approve the elimination of that, then pavements and signage, pavement marking, signage, etc., would have to be possibly removed. And then finally, this wasn't in the report directly, but Public Works is going to work to develop a school crossing guard policy that will lay out the specific warrants that we would recommend loyalists adopt for the use of school crossing guards. in my research, it appears the 40 is probably too high for the type of service that we're providing, and we need to determine what the appropriate level is to accept that Loyalist should have, but Loyalist should adopt a standard level of service in order to provide consistency. If we don't have any level of service, or as far as the number of students, and an intersection meets the warrant for, like a gap study, for instance, meets that warrant analysis, but there's no number of students, then a single student might trigger the need for crossing guards, and you could be into a much larger number of crossing guards throughout the township. So it's important that I set a threshold. Where that threshold is, we're going to work on determining that. But that I've seen some municipalities as low as 5, and some as high as the 40 that are recommended. And it really depends on where you are, the type of municipalities you are, and recognizing this service has been in place for a long period of time. So, and then finally, we have the recommendations, and that was that the lunchtime crossing guards are removed from all current locations except the Main Street Odessa crossing. And then this change be communicated to the OPP and the local school boards. We're hoping the schools will we're hoping that the school boards will assist us with the local schools will assist us with communicating that to the parents throughout the summer. And it's a little unfortunate; it's a little late to in the school year. Public Works are going to undertake additional studies to confirm the findings from the Kildare and Manitou Crescent West Warren study to see whether that location could be eliminated. And we're also going to review if there's other locations within the townships that should be considered. There's been some discussion whether this specific crossing should actually be one block to the south where the walkways come across. And some of the observation of crossing guards are a little, they see where the kids are crossing, where they're not crossing with them. And so those are different types of things you want to look at are there more appropriate locations for those crossing guards? So. And then we would report back to council with the final recommendations on crosswalk or school crossing locations once the study's been completed. Any questions? Sorry, I know that was long.
Thank you. Council, any questions for staff? Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, thank you for that report, Alex. I certainly support the move towards developing a policy, and I certainly understand and concur with all the reasoning in there. As to the particular decisions vis-a-vis those particular locations and the methodologies and studies that justify those decisions. Obviously, you referred to it in the report and in your presentation. I would expect there to be some negative feedback in the public. And after the committee of adjustment meeting we just had, our first inclination, there's definitely a perception in Amherstview in particular of increased traffic issues. I wonder if you would consider as part of the communication strategy when Public Works develops that with our marketing and communications folks, that they develop potentially a bit of a cheat sheet for members of council, because I expect that we will be ones that will get some of the calls. Obviously, the answers to the cheat sheet are in the report, but something pithy and handy to have to hand to explain the direction we're moving in from a policy perspective with justifications that we're making. If that would be looped into the communication strategy, as I expect, we'll hear about it.
Any other, Councilor Frederick?
I think you're going to hear about it right now. Some of the things, as a former principal, these are questions I'd be asking you. First of all, JK to 5, how did you differentiate? Did somebody know this kid's in grade 7, this kid's in grade 8?
It's a guess.
Educated guess.
The guess of the employee sitting there going,
Okay.
is that a 5 or 6 or 7? It's we don't go up and ask each one and say where you fall.
And I would say with the 7/8, based on my professional and my personal life, often 7/8 are taking a JK to 5 to school. So I would think that should figure into a number, just my own opinion.
If a student crosses, like if a junior kindergarten to grade 5 student crosses with either a parent or another child or anybody else, that still counts in the crossing points.
The 7, 8 and the parent?
The child under grade 5 would count in the initial count.
Yeah.
The older student.
Is the one in brackets?
In the brackets.
So the brackets are on top of, okay. The collisions, there's no mention of the collision data in the report. Do you have any off the top of your head?
We do have the OPP data for collision,
Okay.
that we are also using for the infrastructure master plan. Typically, where we really look at the collision data is where we start looking at new sites or potential comments rather than existing sites. I'm certainly not aware of us having 2 accidents at a school crossing anywhere in this township on an annual basis. So
Fair enough.
I think we'd all agree with that.
Yeah, I know you would. We would too. The only one thing I would say is the Amherst Public School boundary is a little different, because it says French immersion. So it's drawn, and I totally get what your report says, like from a township point of view, I guess. The one thing that, what's the general cost of the program? Just a ballpark.
Yeah, so.
So the total cost for the whole program was about $76,000 in 2022.
Okay. And is that just staff costs, or is there anything, signage or anything like that?
There'll be some
Yeah,
signage
okay.
and supplies, but generally it's staffing costs.
Okay. I guess some of the things, when I was looking at the first map you showed there, my concern, again, just from a general point of view, is it's excellent. There's 3 4-way stops. I think, maybe in those other areas, if there's an elimination of a program, maybe we need to go to a 3-way or a 4-way. Fairfield Public, obviously, it's a 3-way. The one at the end of Kildare at Manitou, I know that's a low number, but that's a very high traffic cross there. And again, with the Mount Carmel redevelopment, I think there's going to be other issues, obviously, you can't deal with right now. Just let me look in here. The one thing, just as a general, I think it's a bad look when we try to communicate to schools over the summer, because I just know how it works. I've been there, done that. And, you could be giving out free money and people just aren't even going to show up or thing. And I guess in my bottom personal thought would be, could this wait till after the infrastructure master plan is done? Like, that just seems to be a natural fit, right? It's sort of part of that whole looking at traffic calming, things like that. And I do think traffic calming would make this a lot easier to sell to the public in general. And again, I don't know if that putting the cart before the horse, or, and just a little side note that I think by eliminating some crossing guards, if we get to that point, and I know it's not what you're saying here, we've got to look at our healthy lifestyles and, trying to encourage people to walk and things like that. I'm 100% with the lunchtime stuff, because I know as a principal, the last school I was at, 97% of the kids stayed at lunch. We were kids. You put 5 of us in a portable, and that was the whole school of 400 kids. So I get that. And again, I just hope that, the one thing I see, and I'd encourage you, maybe you already have, to look at the City of Kingston's report they did last year under Councillor Hill. That sort of looks at a bigger picture. And I think just being familiar with what happens at Winston Churchill, I don't know if we could do that here, but where parents can't drive within a certain distance, the streets closed for like half an hour before, half an hour after. I'd be interested to see if something like that, and I know that's not really the crossing guard thing, but it may eliminate a crossing guard at certain points. Anyways, thank you.
If I could just add there, the question, I think you mentioned the potential of increasing stop sign or always stops. there's warrants for that as well that can certainly be reviewed. One of the issues we find that we like. This township's had a long history with the use of stop signs for traffic calming purposes, and the reality is they don't work. And the reason why, if you don't meet the warrants for stop signs, people ignore them. If you don't have the volume of traffic at the stop sign, it becomes very easy to roll through or to just shoot right through it, which creates even more of a safety issue because people are expecting the vehicle to stop and then it just drives through because they know there's never anybody there. So, yes, we want to look at those locations, but we need to also study them to ensure that it's appropriate for the type of signage that's going to be in place at those intersections. So.
One more thing, Your Worship.
Yeah.
Just one more thing. Totally agree on that. And I guess, it's the common sense of, high school kids, even if you have a crossing guard, I don't know if there's common sense there at all. And I was interested in the crossing at Amherst and at the end of Fairfield. I would think that most of those kids are crossing having been dropped off by a parent. You know what I mean? Like, and there's
no demand over there.
Yeah, and I'm thinking, well, where are those kids coming from? Are they coming over the tracks from Amherst Golf Course or what? So it's and I do think people who drop their kids off, they're part of the problem too. Is that you get into that routine. I'm driving 190 days a year, and I'm not paying attention, and we all get into that, but.
I suspect that's why we think some of our afternoon numbers are higher than our morning is the drop offs are happening in the morning and the kids are walking home from school in the afternoon. I suspect, just knowing my own experiences, that's probably the reality. And absolutely, when the decision was made to move the busing for Amherst Public to the side of Amherst Drive, into that lay-by area, it pushed a lot of the parking, the drop-off areas into that Ely Pratt parking lot on the north side, which is not ideal because now you're creating a need that probably isn't really warranted.
And if I could just add one more, Your Worship. Also, the before and after school programs sort of skew the numbers because you don't know how many some days are showing up and how many aren't, and I know parents still have to pay for it whether they bring the kid or not. So, anyways. Good luck.
Thank you. And as we said before, we're not proposing to eliminate the crossing guard prior to the beginning of the school year. But what we want to do is try and communicate to the parents to just see what feedback is. We do intend to study that crossing specifically again. In fact, we're having a discussion. We're probably going to re-study all of the 8 different locations again in the new year or in the new school year, just so we have more of a trending as to what's happening. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Boudreaux.
Previous, Your Worship. I like the whole idea of a standardized situation so that we've got something like the deputy said. I would just like to keep a really good eye on the Briscoe and Park at Mount Carmel. I live right near there. I see the traffic. I know that, and this is the thing that throws me off, that how Amherst Public kids would also come through that crossing. They don't have grade 7 or 8 for French immersion. They go to Lac Eddie. So I just don't get how 156 kids come through there on 3 grades, with one school having a limited number of 7 and 8s, and only in 7 grades from JK to grade 5. I just don't see the numbers being 7 that are 7 grades and 156 that are 3 grades. So I'd like to maybe, if you were going to look at that again, that would be awesome, just to double check those numbers. Because that one, I see a lot of volume, that's all. And
yeah, I don't disagree. There's definitely some crossing activity there. And like I say, there may be a few that are in the wrong category, but the reality is that we're not even close to where that 40 warrant would be. And so like I say, we need to decide what is the acceptable, the loyalist level of service that we want to provide going forward. So.
Thank you. Councilor Harris.
Thank you, through the chair. The comment for the 15 minutes earlier in the morning and the afternoon. I've heard that from parents that that increase in coverage a little bit earlier would be helpful.
Any other comments or questions?
If you would entertain it, I would move to accept the report and adopt the recommendation with through A through E.
So moved, second by, Councilor Bluder. Any comments from the mover,
Only again to thank staff for bringing it forward.
seconder?
I just think they're going in the right direction, so we have to better look at things and yeah, we'll get it right.
Any other comments, questions? I just have one very quick question. Going forward, how often would it be in the policy how often it would be reevaluated each one of the sites?
I've seen that in some municipal policies where they include a certain number of sites that are done annually. I think where you really want to focus on is where you're seeing major changes, such as development areas or growth related issues. Those areas would probably want to be studied, like new areas would want to be studied a little bit more often. Once we establish that baseline, we're not seeing, I think for the next few years, we want to do it fairly consistently. And then if we're not seeing major changes, then it's maybe it's every other year or every third year sort of thing going forward. But we can certainly include that discussion of that in the policy.
Thank you.
Can I just ask one question?
Yes, Councilor Burke.
Can I ask a question on part E there, that staff provide council with final recommendations on locations once the study has completed? Is that specifically just to D, or is that to another, like an updated study?
If any additional locations that are identified, or should there be either for addition or elimination, would definitely come back to council for that. That is specifically referring to the Manitou Kildare,
Okay.
specifically in this recommended case, but we would not implement a new crossing guard location or eliminate one would have come back at this time.
Super, thanks.
Thank you. Just double check, any other comments? In that case, I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion is passed. Thank you for the presentation and answering all the questions. So with that, we're up to adjourn. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Councilor Project, so move. Deputy Mayor, seconded. All in favor? Motion is passed. Thank you. We are adjourned. 8:02.
To be on, later, on the subject again.
Second.